Haxton, and I'm the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine here in beautiful Kirksville, Missouri. Our little museum is actually an international museum. Not only do we serve Kirksville and the state of Missouri, but the whole nation of the United States and international osteopathic practitioners all over the world. So today, maybe it's good to find out a little bit about osteopathy, its history, how it even happened. I mean, why did it happen in Kirksville and not happen, somewhere in Europe where all the thousands of years of education and stuff were going on? Well, you're going to find out why Kirksville had to be the place for osteopathy. And once we grew it, then it went back to Europe. And now there's hundreds of schools there. And just the other day, I was talking to a group of faculty from 33 countries. So our little museum is really quite important. And right now, we're going for accreditation, which is the highest standards of museum. We have been working on this since 1997, so a full 23 years. It is not an easy process, and only the greatest museums get to be accredited. So we are well on the path to that, and hopefully within 9 months to a year, I can tell you that we are an accredited museum, which lets us actually trade and use stuff from the Smithsonian Institute. They have a lot of osteopathic stuff, but because they have millions of items, they can't share those unless you're accredited. And they can't put them on display because there's so much stuff. And so we can actually permanently borrow and put that stuff back on. Because osteopathy was so important in the 1920s that they created a display that stayed at the Smithsonian all the way through the 1960s. We'd love to get some of that stuff back. But now let's talk about osteopathy, what it is, how it came to be, and I hope you enjoy. I'm going to share my screen so you actually get to see a program that I've developed for this. And we're going to make it the full screen. Hopefully that'll work. And there we are. And see if I can, oh, there I am. And so this just gives you a little background on myself. I've been the director now for 20 years at the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine. I, again, lecture all over the world. During COVID, it's all like this on Zoom. But when we're not tied down, I get to go and see all over the world. Our objectives today is just kind of what was school like back in the day of Dr. Still? How did we come to be? And what was it like for the students? Also, what's going on? We have a lot of issues with race and inclusiveness, and Dr. Still was very inclusive. We'll talk about that. But Dr. Still says, if you want to know the story, the history, you got to go before the thing. So we got to get before Dr. Still and before osteopathy to come forward and understand osteopathy. And so that is our osteopathic beginnings. And I love this kindly picture of Dr. Still. He had a motto. His kind of quote for life was, love everybody and justice for everybody. If we followed those practices, probably a lot of issues in the world wouldn't be so bad today. This was a journey of the soul. When we live, we've got maybe 90 years to live, and we get to learn and do wonderful things. And that's what Dr. Still says is, do it loving all people and helping and being fair to all people. So we've got a great founder here. So kind of going back, as he said, before osteopathy, we never could have had osteopathy in Europe because of the way the system was set up. So 1,000 years ago, the churches, particularly the Catholic churches in Italy, set up the schools. All the universities were religious based. Now, they can be religious, but they can be just secular, just basically public institutions of learning. But in those days, it was all controlled by the church, and they decided what would or wouldn't be taught. So we've got 1,000 years of universities, teaching basically by the control of the church. Now, democracy, people's vote. That started in the UK, in England, about 800 years ago with the Magna Carta. And that was the first time that people, not just the king, but the people who owned the land, so they're pretty much prominent people, but they got a say in what happened too. And so thus, Parliament was established through the Magna Carta. And now we have politics and we have church. And those two forces decided what could or could not exist. And that's why something new like osteopathy, which was actually practiced, but just family to family, and it wasn't really established kind of as a system that a university was. It was just, again, something passed through, but it was nothing standardized as part of education that you could get at a university or that would be passed to practice against the other doctors. So it took coming to America. You know, when we first came here, we didn't have universities. We didn't have great institutions to train doctors. And as a result, you just got what you could get. The frontier life, as Dr. Still said, was daily life and death. People died all the time. One bad mistake, and that was it. That's why people had so many kids. You usually lost half of them just through accidents and things. And so in frontier America, a new idea like using your hands to put things out of alignment back and standardizing this as a form of education took off. And that is why it was able to happen in America. We didn't have these thousand-year institutions saying you can't do that or people controlling. Even politics was fairly new. It's just the local guy. And so what ended up happening is medicine was actually practiced in the home. You had your own herb garden, and we invite you to come see the medicinal garden at the campus. It's open 24 hours a day, and you can come and get the catalog and learn about plants that were used for medicine. Now, we tell you, this is based on historic information. We're not advocating to use these plants or even try these things out. It is just an exhibit of the past, okay? So until these materials are researched and put in the pharmacy, again, it's more informational based. But you had your own pharmacy in your own house, and that's how basically medicine was practiced. And you learn from the neighbors, well, what worked for you? Um, so when Dr. Still, and this is a picture of him as a young man, really handsome guy, big bow tie, kind of stylish, big flop of hair. He was like any other guy of the time. He just wanted to find his sweetie, get married, have a few kids, live a nice life on the farm, earn, work, be happy, simple pleasures. But after he got married and had his first child, and his crops were all planted for the year, a hailstorm came and wiped out the crops and destroyed his livestock. We know how that happens here in Missouri. We all the time are getting these strange storms well into summer. And so this is what happened on the 4th of July. My children once, I was away, said that we had one of these hailstorms, and 3 by 4 inch spiky hailstorms had fallen, and they'd actually put 3 or 4 in the freezers so that I could see them when I came home. So I know we get these strange storms that wipe out everything. I mean, look what happened to Iowa this year. Out of the blue, about the same time, these sheer winds just basically flattened the entire corn crop. This is kind of what happened to Dr. Still. Everything was destroyed. So he thought, well, it's too late to plant, and farming has just been really wiped out for me. He thought, I'm well educated. I can become a teacher. And so he and his wife decided to try to teach. But kind of like it is now, teaching, though it's a noble profession, hasn't gotten the funds and the support that it always should. And even then, less so. He was making $15 a month. He said, my family was starving. We could not live on a teacher's salary. So I had to find something new. And I looked to my brothers, my oldest brother, Ed, who was down in Macon, and my brother, James, and my father, who was a preacher doctor, Abram. He'd learned to be a doctor and also trained to be a preacher so he could heal the body and heal the spirit. They were making good money and living a good life. So A.T. Still said, I think I'll go and join my father because a doctor could teach a doctor. It's called an apprenticeship. And once that doctor thought you were ready, you could go down to the courthouse and get your license as a surgeon and a physician. And so that is how Dr. Still originally got educated to be a doctor. He learned by practicing side by side with his father. And that again was fairly normal. Even today, we see apprenticeships with chefs in kitchens. If you go to the Take Root Cafe, the chefs often are training other chefs, maybe who are in a university program. Same with doctors a little bit today. Once you graduate, you're a resident and you're kind of staying around and working with other doctors until you gain enough experience to go on your own. Electricians, plumbers, bricklayers, they all train people um, to be in these professions. So Dr. Still learned to be a physician by practicing with his father. During this time, the Civil War came on. That was the war against slavery, and it was an agricultural South against probably more of a mechanized and factory North. What ended up happening in this issue, of course, is that the North and South of the United States fought each other over one of the issues of slavery. Dr. Still did not believe in slavery, coming from, a very religious family background with his father being a preacher. They spoke out openly against slavery, and it got him in a lot of trouble because people didn't like to be told what to do. And kind of like today, people don't like to be told what to do in the United States, whether it's good or bad. So the bottom line is, Dr. Still was against slavery and ended up in the war fighting for those causes. When the North won and slavery was abolished, and our country came back together, they offered what is like the GI Bill today. When you fight in the service, you sometimes have an opportunity to go back to school and learn a new trade. Well, he had already been working as what we call a steward, kind of assisting the surgeons and the doctors in the war. So now he could go to medical school. But when he went to the medical school, they were just burning and popping blisters, bleeding people, taking out their blood, dosing them with poisons, arsenic, mercury, morphine. He said, is this after several months? He goes, is this all we're going to learn? And they said, yeah. He said, this isn't medicine. The I'd rather just go and learn it on my own because your degree isn't worth anything if this is what you're doing. You see, his wife, his first wife that was on the farm with him, had lost a child in birth, and then several years later got pregnant and lost that child. And she became depressed and basically stopped eating, stopped giving up hope, and died, leaving Dr. Still with three other children. Well, Dr. Still basically was remarried, and his new wife was a pharmacist, and her daddy was a doctor. So she understood more of what Dr. Still was kind of about. Well, her first child, a boy, died. She had another little girl. And while that little girl got to the age to start walking and doing things, the children of Dr. Still's first marriage, those three, got sick and started dying one, two, three. And while they were treating those children, the little girl got a cold that turned into pneumonia and she died too. Imagine losing four children in 1 month from 11 months to 12 years old. It was devastating to Dr. Still. He called in the best doctors to help him, but it was no good. And he said, not only did my children die, but I think the treatments caused them to suffer. And so he was going to find a better way. He and his wife together were going to look for a better way of medicine. And that's how they came up with osteopathy. It was really based on the basics: good health, eating, exercising, positive thoughts, and if something gets out of alignment, using your hands to use what we call manual manipulation to put things back. Just like a car can get out of tune and a bicycle can get out of tune from being used, so can our bodies. I do little exercises and running and workout. Those little stresses can put things just a little bit off. And if those things are off, aren't addressed, they can become bigger things, and basically destroy the whole body. It's kind of like a machine. A little wobble becomes a bigger wobble and eventually throws the whole machine apart. So you need things working as they should in perfect harmony. And that's kind of what manipulation is about when we work with muscle, nerves, and bones in the body. So Dr. Still has this new idea of health. And what we find out today is the healthier you are, the more resistant you are to disease, including this COVID-19. you know, 20 or 30 extra pounds might put you closer towards diabetes too, might cause your blood pressure to be up, might cause respiratory issues. And if you get a disease like this new virus, your body might not be able to survive it. So Dr. Still says anybody can be brought closer to health. And that's what we do with people. We help you be the healthiest self on this journey. So Dr. Still sets up this school. And it's a pretty humble school when you look at it. This little school still exists. Dr. Still said, despise not the day of small things. And I think that's a biblical quote. But what he's basically saying is just because it was a little step, don't downplay it and don't, you know, basically hate it, because that one step could lead to another step and become something bigger. You know, what we call a journey. Any journey begins with one step, followed by another step. And before you know it, you might be halfway around the world. So what Dr. Still did is he kept his little schoolhouse where he had 21 students and said that from this little teaching of my ideas of health, we will grow a whole institution. And he was right, because today, 25% of all family physicians are DOs. From one man with one idea 128 years ago, we have 25% of the population being served by this way of healthcare, and 58 schools that came from this little shack, and hundreds throughout the world. So when Dr. Still's on the frontier, Daddy's preaching and doctrine 6 weeks times away. He's traveling around. He's seeing his clients, his clergy, his church people. He goes to their house. He doesn't have a church, and he treats them in their home. He first treats the body, and then he treats the spirit with religion. And that's why osteopathy today is body, the mind, and the spirit that you can't quite touch. But that spirit is what makes you unique. It's what makes you you. Why you like the things you do and wear the clothes you do and have the hairstyles that you do. It's your way of seeing you. And it's more than just this physical body. You know, we can think of the body, and Dr. Still loved cars. He said, my greatest ambition is to have a car and get to heaven, because I think he was a little too old to be driving around, but people did drive it. But think of our body like a car. They come in all shapes and sizes and colors, and mainly their job is to get us around. Well, that's what the body's like. It comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and its job is to take the spirit around and see things. You know, when your car goes to the Grand Canyon and you get out and look at this beautiful natural wonder, the car doesn't care. It just sits there. It's for the person inside. So just as when we go around in our bodies, it's what's inside that's important, according to Dr. Still. And his mama, she could mend a roof, make shoes, and make a perfect apple pie. She was a natural engineer as far as Dr. Still was concerned, and she could do anything his dad could do, and usually better. When Dad would come home from 6 weeks of being away, Mom continued to do things. She was a frontier woman. She made it happen. So Dr. Still knew she was quite capable of doing anything a man could do. So of course, when he opened up his medical school, he accepted women too. And in this colorized pictures, there are actually 5 women that you can see across there. 6 were actually in the class. And Dr. Still didn't treat them any different. As a matter of fact, he gave the tougher assignments to the women because he knew he could do it. When the anatomy instructor from Europe left because he was done teaching and wanted to do other things, he basically took one of the women in this photo and she became the anatomy instructor. She edited the scientific journal of medicine of osteopathy, and she opened up her own school in Denver, Colorado. So Dr. Still didn't treat the women any different from men. If anything, he probably worked them a little harder because he knew they could do it. So one of the things about osteopathy is knowing the body. And so that is done through dissection. If you don't know where things are at, how do you know when things are abnormal? You can't fix a car if you don't know the engine and the tires and the makings. The same with the body. You could never have enough anatomy. And today at our university, we do this with cadavers that are donated. We're very thankful for the Kirksville community people and around the area that when they die, give their bodies to the school to be used for research. They keep all of the pieces and return them back to the body, or basically have them cremated and give those back to the body, to the family. But also every year we have a celebration and thank the families. The students all come out and thank for the loved ones that were donated for science. And so it's very special how we get these bodies. Now we also have a digital body. You can go on the computer and you can move your little mouse through and see all parts of the body. So you've got a real body, you've got a computerized body, and now we actually teach what we call ultrasound. You can actually look in real time what's happening in your body with these scanners. So 3 ways to learn what is typical and what is normal so we can do our jobs. Now, students would often in those days stay in rented, basically furnished rooms. And you can see there's a sign that basically is, this is I don't know if I can move myself around or not. There we are. Rooms for rent. Kind of get myself a little bit out of the way, but rooms for rent. And this is Pickard. And I think that's a name that's still probably popular around the area. But in 1914, you can see the students that would just stay in people's homes. They didn't have the apartments that we have today. Uh, and students gathered, and this looks like it probably is maybe about Halloween because there's a skeleton, and we see some football, so we know it's football season, so it's got to be fall. There's a pumpkin, so like a kind of a Halloween basket. And so what we get to see here is students just kind of having a good time back in 1905, kind of like today. And in the school, we see how big the lecture halls are. You know, from those 21 students, those despise not the day of small things, we grew to 600 students in just a few years. They would graduate in cycles of 200, winter, summer, and fall. So you can see how they could open up these large classrooms to teach the students. And the surgical pit. This would be where everybody could look down into, like an auditorium, down into the center where patients would be treated. And that's how you would learn, by observing. And parades. Now, most of you would recognize there's our courthouse to the right in a big tent. It's hospital day. It's celebrating osteopathy. And the students would march from the school downtown. You know, the interesting thing is not too many things have changed too much, on the square. And so, you know, basically Pickler's famous is exactly how it's looked, and that's the Take Root Cafe. And so a lot of the things, a lot of the buildings, and I was just down there this week, they're removing more of the old metal that's hiding the beauty of our old buildings. And so we're seeing more and more of the historical downtown in Kirksville. So a lot of those buildings, if Dr. Still came today, he'd know exactly where the courthouse is and all the things. So again, celebrating and having parades is a big deal, and still today in Kirksville. Now, this is on the front steps of the courthouse, and we'd recognize that interest. And they had sorority clubs, clubs where women could come together and share ideas and get to know each other and support each other. We also had fraternities, and this is, of course, how the campus looked back in those times. The Theta Psi, obviously smoking a cigar, riding around on a cart, having some fun. You know, again, guys like to have a little bit of a good time after studying all day. And so, again, what fraternities were like back in the time of Dr. Still. Football games. You know, we used the field that's at the Truman campus, kind of right now between what we would call Baldwin Hall and basically the new auditorium building, Ophelia Parish. That was a field. And we were able to use it, as well as Truman students were, to play football. So again, we get to see that, things aren't too different. Maybe the clothing is, but having fun and getting together is kind of about the same thing. One of the last things that Dr. Still taught at our school before he died was about mental health. You know, people can become depressed. People can have hard times with decisions or stress because of events in their life. Certainly during this lockdown, there's a lot more stress for people, and we're worried that you're being optimistic. You know, if you're losing your job, if you're not able to get out, if you're afraid of the disease that might kill you, your your children or your loved ones, certainly that's a lot of mental health stress. And Dr. Still helped create what's the sanitarium. If you go south to Macon, just before you leave Macon, headed towards Moberly or Columbia, you'll see a big yellow building with a smokestack. That was the Stillhilder Sanitarium, where people were treated with respect because they have mental illness. They would socialize them with other people. They would work on diets to give them healthier diets or diets that could help them. They would exercise and play sports. And so we see a variety of things that would help people stabilize and get back to normal. So again, osteopathy has always been excited about these things. Now, if you were to come to campus today, and you can't right now because of COVID, we have these notices. You have to check in. Every morning I fill out a chart that says, I've not been around anybody with COVID. I don't have a temperature. I don't have a sore throat. All the different checklists have to be submitted every day. Then you come in, you get your temperature taken, and if all's good, you can go to work. But for the most part, we're trying to keep people away from each other, social distancing, because that's the best way to keep the numbers down. And right now, we don't have any cases on campus, and that's a good thing at the medical school because it is a struggle when people go home for the weekend or out and about. They could catch this disease, and we certainly don't want to spread it. So we have signs reminding us, keep 6 feet away. We have to wear our masks when we're not, basically when we're out and about. If you're in your office or like I am in a space that's enclosed, we can take our mask off. But when we're in the public on the campus, we are to wear our mask to try to keep basically the particles of our breathing contained. And so again, students are also trained. We have more space. This used to be a lot tighter where they learned to manipulate, to put muscle, nerves, and bones back. This is our faculty, Lisa Archer. Again, how we're teaching with more space, and we keep students in their own little pods. So the students only stay with the same number of students. So if one gets sick, only that group, it doesn't contaminate or infect the rest of the student body because we've got 175 new students and 175 second-year students. So there's 350 doctor students here that we don't want to get sick, and so we watch out for them. That's how the campus is today. A little bit more about osteopathy. It is always meant to be an international profession. Dr. Still trained Dr. Nemoto here in the top from Japan. He came looking for good ideas to take medicine back to Japan and didn't find anything in America. The bleeding, blistering, and poisoning that Dr. Still saw was what was standard. But he heard about osteopathy and he came to Kirksville, and Dr. Still personally trained him. And we still have a relationship with the osteopathic Japanese institutions today, 120 years after Dr. Nemoto was here. Just yesterday, I was chatting with a school in Kobe, Japan, and they come here and learn dissection, and we work with them, spreading osteopathy throughout the world. Dr. Still said, the idea of osteopathy and scientific progress is accepted as truth, not only in America, but other countries. And he welcomed people. In 1915, he said that we don't want to compromise osteopathy. We want it to grow and incorporate all the natural healings, the least intrusive way to keep healthy. And the last thing Dr. Still said is we need to band together and create an international school. And that's what I was doing through Zoom 2 days ago. Now, their meeting was at 9 a.m., but in our part of the world, it was 3 in the morning. So I got up at 3 in the morning and we were looking at, for all the countries of Europe, how we can teach osteopathy better and have it one standard. And that's what you need in those countries. Down here, you actually see somebody from Persia. Persia would basically be what we would consider the Middle East. And so as we would look at our students that basically came from the different countries of the Middle East, they were welcomed here. People from England, people from Australia, Latin countries. Dr. Still taught everybody, and that's why it's around the world today. Right now, we hear a lot about Black Lives Matters and riots and protests and things going on in major cities. Well, Dr. Steele was an advocate for the Black community, and Kirksville has the Congolese community today, which is a fairly recent Black community. But prior to that, we actually had a Black community that was very vibrant in Kirksville, probably descendants from basically the slave era. And Dr. Steele was very kind in working with that community. Dr. Steele was an abolitionist, so he was fighting so that slavery didn't even exist. So that's why he was in Kansas. He was actually a legislature. And when some people were trying to push to have slaves, Dr. Steele was announcing, advocating, and speaking against it. And Kansas did come in as a state free of slavery. One of the students who knew Dr. Still said that the first time I saw Dr. Still, I was at the normal school. That's Truman State University. Normal is actually meaning a college to teach teachers. So when we look at our teachers in the high schools and the junior highs and the elementary, those teachers originally had to be trained. And Truman University's first job when it was created was to teach teachers, and they still teach teachers today. So this student was over at the normal school and he noticed Dr. Still treating an older Black man. Now, this was very unusual because Blacks were supposed to have their medicine from the Blacks and whites take their medicine from the whites. Equal, but separate. That doesn't really work. And to see a white man treating a Black person was unheard of. And so he came up and watched and saw Dr. Still working with the wrist bones so that this man could get back to work and make a living. So again, as we see, osteopathy has always been inclusive to all people. Love everyone, justice for everyone. Dr. Still's quote. When he built this brand new, from that little shack, so many students were coming. I told you there were 600 within a few years coming to the school, that they had to build a big brick institution. Well, Kirksville celebrated that. My gosh, this will bring in money. It'll bring in students who are buying things in the area. So the shops, the hotels, the restaurants, all the businesses were going to thrive. You know, Kirksville grew from 1,800 residents before Dr. Still came to within a few years, 8,000. The town grew 8 times the size just by having Dr. Still here teaching osteopathic healthcare. And so when he opens his big brick school, everybody in Kirksville thought it was great. But a week after the grand opening, he opened it solely for the Black community because you see, in 1895, they didn't consider themselves part of Kirksville. And so Dr. Still went to them directly and said, look, you actually were the bricklayers and the builders of this fine institution. I want you to come and use it. I want you to benefit from this place, and I want you to tell your friends. Dr. Still truly loved all people and really just wanted everyone not to suffer. This Black woman had a headache, and she comes to the infirmary, and lo and behold, Dr. Still is so popular, people are coming from all over, the most important people in the world, whether it be Mark Twain or Harold Taft, our presidents, or Buffalo Bill, famous celebrities, Helen Keller, the Rockefellers, everybody came and got treated in osteopathy. And so while this Black woman was waiting for Dr. Still to fix her headache, in shows up Mr. Forker. He's the Speaker of the House. Next to the president, the most important person. Well, he was there for himself and his son. And when Dr. Still comes out, he says, I treat people in order. Just because you have a title, just because you have some money doesn't make you more special. You got a little lucky, but paying for the poor is same as the paying for the rich, and we will take you in order as you showed up and you'll get treated. Well, the Black woman was like, I don't have any money, Dr. Still, so you should treat this person. She goes, but I'll do some work for you. I'll wash your floors. I'll clean your laundry, whatever you need to pay you back. And Dr. Still said no such thing. He treated the woman and then gave her money to get back home so that she could go back and make a living. See, Dr. Still said, you know, we treat the poor because it's the right thing to do. And those people like Mr. Forker with money, they can pay for their treatment. They've got the money, but we shouldn't charge people that don't have the money. And today we've built community health clinics all over the world so that people will get good care. And we have got several in Kirksville as a result. Well, we find out that philanthropy, that's giving of yourself. The Booker T. Washington Osteopathic Institute, it was a free clinic in Chicago. And again, there's a huge Black population and a lot of disparity in income. This clinic would see the women and the children in the mornings and afternoon. The husbands, the men who would be working, could actually come to the clinic in the evenings and get treated. So again, we have always treated and helped all communities. You know, Osteopathy was such a great inclusive profession. There was even a Black medical school. Basically, it was the Washington, D.C. Osteopathic School in our nation's capital. And by 1926, they'd actually graduated 4 classes. Now, these were much smaller groups of people and didn't have a lot of money. Unfortunately, because of the Depression, it wiped out a lot of schools and businesses, and that included the Black Osteopathic College. Just like today, COVID has basically devastated a lot of private little businesses, and it's really unfortunate. But we graduated our first Black students in the 1920s. Dr. Still was upset because he never got to graduate a student in Kirksville, but the education system was such that they didn't have the sciences. Even most people didn't go to school past 8th grade, so becoming a doctor was a little bit of a challenge unless you had the benefit of the normal school, Truman State University, to help you out. So since no Black students had entered, he just said that it was kind of sad. Dr. Still died in 1917. And again, he supported women, men, Asians, all people. And we, again, should look at him as a good role model, is treat people with fairness, be kind, and help all people. And so that was our story today about osteopathy, to give you a little more background. This is what the museum looks like. And some of our workers, the two people up front, the Black woman and the tall student, white student, are both students and now graduates since this picture was taken. And so we too are inclusive in our hiring at the museum. And we're open to all families. And we hope soon that COVID is finished and that you can come and visit the museum. We'll certainly let you know when that's available. I really think we've got a real gemstone in our Adair County Library, and I really thank them for letting me share our great history of osteopathy. And hopefully we'll be doing some other programs in person, or if not, on Zoom. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.